Welcome to the Beyond Profit panel, the corporation's changing role in doing good. Our conversation today will be led by Peter Boyd, who is a lecturer at Yale School of the Environment, as well as the Yale School of Management. He's also a resident fellow at Yale Center for Business and the Environment and CEO of Time for Good, his own company that helps leaders and their teams build purpose-driven paths to maximize impact. So Peter, I'm going to pass it off to you.
Great. Thanks very much, Celia, and welcome everybody and welcome the panel. And we've got, as I say, we've got one more that is joining us very shortly. But yeah, thanks Ralph and Heather and Jennifer's on her way. It's currently in the audience with everybody there. It's great to have this panel in amongst the Yale Philanthropy Conference because we're I think one of the tasks of the whole conference is to reimagine the a potentially traditional narrower definition of philanthropy and focus more on mission-driven work in its entirety. So it's great to have this panel focused on the corporate role, both in and out of a traditional foundation and of what the company should be doing in ESG and sustainability and social more broadly. So we've got a great panel lined up to talk about their specific role as a person and as a career path, as well as what their role as a company, and then seeing what the broader changes are in the industry. Process from now is we've got an opening round. They'll be doing the intros rather than me. Their traditional bios are on the website. I don't want to waste time on that. We've got I've got a few questions, including a little quick fire round. But throughout, if you have any questions, please tap them into the Q&A. Celia and I will try and either weave them in or have a section at the end, depending on how the conversation goes. And there will be an optional hangout afterwards if there's any questions there, which is even more participatory than this conversation. We've got about 3 hours worth of questions with these guys, but we'll do what we can in the time we've got. I wish we could have recorded our prep session. There's Jennifer. We're all in.
Made it in.
Excellent. You found the back door into the stage area. So I would love to do actually, and maybe I had it in my notes here, Jennifer. You're on the hot, so you're going to start directly with you. What I want to do is to tell us about your role right now, like what you do, what your company is doing, and what you're currently focused on with regard to sustainability. And I'm really intrigued, as I think the audience will be, the going from one brand to 8. So weave any of that in as you go.
Great. Thanks so much. So excited to be here. And thanks for your patience while we had those technical difficulties. So I run all of the sustainability and social impact programs across Williams-Sonoma Inc. and its family of brands. Beginning in 2019 as well, I started running all of our ESG strategy across the company, so how we communicate about this work. But my journey here was a little bit circuitous, and we'll talk about that more. I spent about a decade in the nonprofit sector, got an MBA, pivoted, really created my role within West Elm. It was focused on craft and artisan work, and our first public commitments there, expanded to our work in fair trade. I took on our global social compliance. In 2019, I moved into a cross-brand role, across our entire family of brands. So you might be familiar with our namesake, Williams-Sonoma Home, but also Pottery Barn Kids and Teen, West Elm, Mark and Graham, and Rejuvenation. And in this role, I moved into an enterprise role, really carved out our sustainability platform. And so today my purview is across all the brands, this center of excellence, embedding it in our brand value, in our products, bringing that to our customers through our choice of, responsible materials and finishes, our approach to waste and circularity. We've made a huge comprehensive climate goal, a science-based target across our entire value chain. And then, also on the ethical production side, worker well-being, and bringing our leadership in the ESG space to both the investment community, but to our customers. And I think that's really been the hallmark of our work, is it's not, a side project to our business, but it's embedded in the business. Over 40% of our products represent one or more of our responsibly sourced initiatives today, and we're driving that to 75% over the next decade, and really, putting our impact where our purchasing power is, which is in the supply chain.
Great, thanks, Jennifer, for getting us started. And Ralph, so a lovely link there from Jennifer's point about sort of it's not a sideshow; it's part of the core piece. Just if you could give your journey, and also fascinating to see your science meets environmental science, technology, management degree from Harvard. There's this bringing your personal experience to bear as well in Volkswagen. Go for it.
Yeah, happy to do that. And not sure if I should feel a bit exotic here, since I'm basically part of group strategy within Volkswagen with my role in sustainability. So to briefly give a glimpse on my career. So I'm meanwhile 25 years plus in always in sustainability, climate strategy, and then quality topics. So having started in research, then worked as a consultant for a number of years across different sectors, and then 13 years in engineering and electronics with Siemens, and now 4 years in Volkswagen. But basically, my key aspiration is really bringing sustainability to the core of the business, and that's what I've done previously at Siemens, where we worked about making products greener and helping customers to reduce carbon emissions. And same we do now within our decarbonization and sustainability programs within Volkswagen. So first and foremost, I really focus on making the core business more sustainable and creating by that a significant impact. Since if you could imagine the Volkswagen passenger car fleet across Audi, Volkswagen, Skoda, Porsche, and the likes, if you take the life cycle of these projects and sum it up in terms of carbon emissions, you end up at 1% of global carbon emissions. So it is significant, and thus it's also a significant task to reduce it, first and foremost in the core business. And that's what we're driving. And then also, same as Jennifer just said, making our supply chains more sustainable, prohibiting child labor, and doing the CSR work and EHS work there with our suppliers. So that's the big things we're driving. Apart from that, Volkswagen also has philanthropic activities, CSR programs, and so forth, with basically my colleagues manage. So we are very much engaged, especially in the area of education and digital education for disadvantaged young people. We have a couple of programs set up during the refugee crisis, offering internships for the refugees and so forth. So there's a number of projects happening there, also intending to create an impact and basically qualifying people to develop themselves. And we also right now starting a smaller initiative on philanthropic and CSR activities in the field of environment protection and climate change mitigation. Let me pause here. I think we will have plenty of time for discussion.
Yeah, diving into a few of those. That's great. Yeah, lots of things there to get us started. And Heather, we're definitely attracted to your position. Mainly, you should got to explain your title first and how it bridges across the sort of explicitly the foundation and the company, and then answer the same question: what you're focusing on right now, and go for it.
Sure. Yeah, I think this is a really good sample of how the CSR/sustainability sector can be widely different, depending on the industry, depending on the kind of company that you're in, and how the role is really evolving. So I work for New York Life. We're the largest mutual life insurance company in the U.S. We've been around for almost 177 years. And I think I can honestly say we've been a mission-based company that entire time. Our mission is to provide financial security and peace of mind through our products and services, which are life insurance, retirement planning, and long-term care and disability insurance. So my role, I started here as the president of the New York Life Foundation, so pretty traditional philanthropic role, running the grant making, the employee engagement, disaster relief programs at the company. I was given sort of a mandate in my first 100 days to write, a 100-day report of sort of, how things were going and the opportunities I saw at the company. And one of the first things I noted was that, we really needed to pull together some kind of a sustainability strategy across the company. I had come from HSBC, which was a relative innovator in the corporate sustainability space. And there were a lot of good things happening at the company, but there was really no aggregation of that work. And so From that time, my role has evolved to also manage ESG strategy as well as reporting for the company. And I think, one big difference between Volkswagen, Williams-Sonoma, and New York Life is that we are a private mutual. So we are not a public company. We don't have to report to the SEC. We don't have all that fun stuff that I'm sure you guys do with investor relations. So that's something that we can delve into in terms of business model, also sort of affecting how these jobs operate. Although it's getting smaller and smaller, the differences as time goes on.
Great. Thanks so much for setting us up. I mean, there's so many places we can go from here, but I think one of the things that we chatted about initially offline, which I think was really interesting, is where your sustainability functions started. Where do you see them now, and where do you see them going? I think maybe if I reverse, like Heather, you've said, did it grow out of foundation and then in, and it was non-existing? And where do you see the sustainability function evolving? Not only in your life, but then also like in some of your peers.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that we call it ESG here, but it's sort of interchangeable. I wouldn't say it evolved from the foundation, because they are somewhat distinct focus areas. So it was more in this ambiguous at the time role of corporate responsibility. I was also the head of corporate responsibility, but that was somewhat undefined, and I think that has evolved to be defined as the ESG sort of aggregator across the company. But of course, we've got a pretty robust governance structure. We work with business units across the business, including our general counsel, our corporate secretary, and our audit functions, risk for sure. So, really the work, I think, in the ESG and sustainability sector is being done across the company. My role here at New York Life is really to aggregate that information, make sure everybody knows what's happening across the company, to report on that. So figuring out, how are we disclosing, which surveys are we answering, what are we going to be a part of, to determine what commitments we're going to be a part of, and then really just help to lead the strategy around which material issues are we focusing on, how do we feel we're doing there, where are the gaps, and what do we need to do to move us forward. And I think most importantly, what are our ambitious goals in this space? And how do we communicate that? And how do we make sure the entire company is on board?
Got it. And then Jennifer, again, a really interesting role, both personally and where the company came from. You said that there's a strategy, or rather, a gap in the strategy that you then filled. Where's and supply chain? You said is where some of where ESG has its home. So talk to us about.
Yeah. So I sit within the sourcing and supply chain organization, and really have since the beginning of my time within Williams-Sonoma Inc. and starting with the West Elm brand. But we had a compliance team that was, in Asia, and it was kind of more from a kind of legal compliance on the health, safety, human rights side of the business and environmental compliance. And so, in a new position within the West Elm brand, what I was able to carve out was kind of the meaning to the brand and embed the work that we're doing, really starting first with craft. We're one of the largest employers of artisans around the world, right? With the purchasing of craft, and how do we convey that to customers? How do we make it authentic? So while I sit within sourcing and supply chain, I work across every different function. I often joke, like, there's not a function within Williams-Sonoma we haven't kind of tasked or made a goal around. So, working with the brand teams to really convey this message, have it come across to our customers, but also sort of the back end to substantiate all of those claims. So, driving within the brand gave us the momentum to be embedded in the business, and, starting with kind of that pioneer with West Elm, and then, bringing all the other brands onto the platform. And so, for example, like our fair trade programs, we started the first factory certified in 2014. And then we're able to bring all the other brands on board by 2017, and deliver premiums to tens of thousands of workers across the world. So just being able to scale that impact. Now, eventually, it's challenging within the brand because we have a lot of shared functions across the enterprise. So we have a shared supply chain, distribution centers, we have shared vendors, we have shared country sourcing offices. So it really made sense to kind of pull out and create the center of excellence, and almost like a template that each brand could draw from, and tailor up something that is more significant to them, from that baseline. So we have sort of these baseline programs across our pillars, that we offer to the brands, and then we help them craft something that's unique to their brand purpose. We've really seen my role grow from this sort of consciousness commitments, the social side, to expanding into environment and taking that on, and then the expansion of ESG strategy, right? So now we run a cross-functional committee that meets on a regular basis. We report to the board quarterly. We have an extended presentation to the board of directors, and it's been really amazing in my 8 years in the company to just see the sea change of driving within a brand to now board level, investor level interest in conversation and alignment across all the functions. So still, I think in a product company, like, we've measured our footprint, 98% of our footprint's in our value chain, 2% in our operations, and that's pretty consistent for companies that make products. So being in sourcing and supply chain is where your impact is. And so I think that's a very valuable place for this to sit. Now, when you think of your larger ESG work, there's a lot of other cross-functional partners, right? Half the S is in supply chain, but half is your associates, your employees, how you're engaging them. So that requires a lot of cross-functional alignment.
Yeah. Yep. And a lovely link. You said it's at 90 to 2. Did you say 90% in value chain?
98 in value chain, 2% in our operation. Right. So yeah. So right. So you can see how.
So almost like a. Sorry, I was just going to say, like with Ralph, almost like a flip, where the sort of the production and getting the car on the road, so to speak, versus the life cycle of the usage of the consumer. Where did sustainability grow with you? So it seemed natural with Jennifer in the supply chain area. What's the VW story?
Yeah, happy to share that one. But beforehand, I'd like to touch base on what Jennifer just said, because we're sharing the exact 98%. So same on our side. It's if you take the life cycle of a car, it's 2% in our operations. The main difference, I think, to your business is that roughly 2/3 or 3/4 even happen at our customers by using fuels to drive the cars. So that's very much different from your side. So on our side, the supply chain is basically 15% or something like that. It will be more on the electric vehicle side. It is less on the ICE side. So the supply chain sustainability is gaining more momentum with e-mobility. Nevertheless, let's say 3/4 happen at our customers right now. If you're talking about ICEs, it's less if you drive an EV. If you drive an EV with green electricity, I mean, the use phase is basically disappearing in terms of carbon footprint, and then the supply chain grows. So that's to put it into numbers. But coming back to your question, Peter, my observation in general for many European companies is first that sustainability has mostly its origins either in the environmental departments, coming so from the environmental side of sustainability, and or often from a communication side. So if I take the example of Volkswagen, and I joined only in 2018. Prior to that, sustainability was part of public affairs, and even back prior to the diesel scandal, I think it was a part of corporate communications. And not to be mistaken, but if you basically have the core of sustainability in communications, then it's very close to window dressing. And really to make an impact, I think you have to sit elsewhere. And so what happened after half a year after I joined Volkswagen, that also the board of management decided, we understand it's a strategic topic, let's move it to corporate strategy. And I had the same experience, by the way, at Siemens, where it also was part of group strategy. So for 3.5 years now, we are sitting in group strategy, because it is obviously a strategic topic. And if you look at the products providing mobility for generations to come, which is our mission, then you're very close to group strategy, because it's about portfolio decision, it's about supply chain decisions, it's about business models, selling, not only selling cars, but selling mobility, offering car sharing and the likes. So I believe it's right now where it belongs in terms of sustainability. The other thing is, same I think as in many other companies, sustainability typically is a hub function, because you're interacting, such as Jennifer said, with so many corporate departments, we are interacting with the supply chain colleagues, with the sales colleagues, with risk management, with corporate governance, with compliance, integrity, and all these. And on top of that, we have a network across our brands. So Audi, Volkswagen, Skoda, Seat, Porsche, they all have their sustainability departments, same as our truck divisions with Scania and MAN, and meanwhile also Navistar in the US. So it's at least three-dimensional metrics, I would say, which we're working in. And my ultimate goal in, let's say, midterm would be that we are no longer needed. So the ultimate goal would be you don't need a central sustainability department because it's embedded everywhere. Not sure if I get there before I retire in 15 years from now, but yeah, the hope is there.
Yeah, interesting. And just before I go into Heather, you caught the piece here about like saying like maybe it's because we're in Europe that it started in the environment comms, and I just wanted to sort of just push a little on, is it because your industry where the emissions sat was sort of and European sort of influence, or can you tease that apart a little? Why you think it started in comms and compliance and then went more central, then went more group strategy? Do you think that's a cross-sector European thing?
Well, the environment, so there are some stats out there in terms of where typical large caps in Europe have their sustainability department, and there is a, let's say, common pattern that was either often in communications or in the environmental department, and it's also the trend which I experienced here at Volkswagen, is that it moves closer to strategy. There are some companies where you also see a movement towards finance, and Heather, you mentioned ESG, and this is basically also how we are meanwhile even more framing our sustainability activities, since we all see that on the capital market there are strong developments and stronger demands than ever on the ESG side. So the buzzword of the year is probably rather ESG than sustainability. And I think given the origins on this environmental side, one of the explanations probably is that there's a high level of understanding and engagement on the environmental side, environmental consciousness, environmental awareness across many European companies. And so there are the people who think about the environment. And then if you think about value chains, you immediately end up thinking about social impacts as well. So that's one of the explanations where I believe it comes from and now evolved into more strategic topics.
Great. And Heather, on the finance side, like where it grew from, where it is now, and where do you think ESG will go? And maybe comment on this sort of center of excellence common theme, despite very different start points.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit different for us. So we we don't create a product, right? We create a service. And so when you look at the 98.2% doesn't really fit as well for a financial services firm. So from an emission standpoint, our largest impact is within our financed emissions. It's within the assets under management. We, along with our boutiques, we've got $750 billion of assets under management. And frankly, it's a little bit harder to be modeling those than it is to model oftentimes straight operations. And so I think that's probably where our biggest focus on the emission side is around financed emissions, and specifically for insurance companies that have lots of different asset classes that we hold. There's a dearth of data, and we could argue about whether there's any reliable modeling, but there's certainly a dearth of reliable modeling for certain asset classes. So it can be really complicated in terms of how you're assessing and then setting goals based on that. But I think for us, we really focus on all of the material issues related to ESG at the company. And so outside of, let's say, financed emissions and GHG emissions, we're also looking at diversity, equity, inclusion. We're looking at training, retention, some of the same issues I'm sure that span across all of our companies. And I think importantly, just given, who's in the audience, this is also true now for nonprofits. We're seeing a lot of nonprofits looking at how does ESG affect their world. And so from that standpoint, in terms of where these things exist, communications actually really is important, right? Because even though, I agree with Rolf, it would be great to know that sustainability and this kind of thinking is embedded across the company, there's always going to be a need to communicate, talk about, disclose, everything that's happening, across the entire enterprise. And I think the same holds true now for nonprofits, especially nonprofits of any scale, where, funders are looking at, in particular, diversity, equity, inclusion. Do you have a statement? Do you have a policy? What are your plans? What are you looking to do? Similarly, at New York Life, we are also disclosing information about our workforce, about our commitments, about how we're looking at pay equity and other things like that. And so, we've started to work on the foundation side with our nonprofit partners to understand, like, providing them with racial equity training, providing them with some of the things that they may not have, additional money laying around to do. And so, we've started to hear now from more nonprofits about how should they be contemplating these ESG type issues. Should they be doing their own materiality assessments, and how do they broach those and then disclose some of this information to their funders or, importantly, potential funders. So I think, the evolution of sort of where this exists can be importantly, sector-based, but also just the priorities and the material issues in the company. So here, I think it's really an enterprise effort. The sort of strategy and reporting lies within corporate responsibility, but I think it's really looking at sort of some of the governance structures that are set up and where those decisions are being made at the board level as well as at the management level. So, we have a steerco that is led by our chief legal officer, but it's made up of a broad range of people from across the business, because this really does involve everybody. When you look at the entire material list of issues, it's probably, there's not one area of the company that isn't affected in some way by all of those issues and need to be understanding what the strategy is and need to be providing information on how they're contributing.
Yeah. And that's a great link. I want to kind of come to stakeholders and how they've changed, maybe just in one question's time. But this idea of pervasiveness of ESG across the company seems to be common, despite how different your sectors are and where ESG came from. I'm wondering where does the ambition come from? Often it's just like you see like a sort of a Paul Pullman and Unilever, so it's like it comes from the CEO, it goes downwards from there. But you've mentioned, Heather, boards, steercos, etc. Maybe want to touch down like where does the driving ambition come from? Do you find in your company and your peers? Who wants to start there? Maybe Jennifer.
Sure, and back to the footprint conversation, just to kind of add on to that. Of that 98% in our value chain, roughly half of that is in materials and production. So directly related to our products, adding in product use, it's about 2/3 of the total footprint. So that kind of leads into kind of where does some of the desire come from? First of all, our customers. So,
Customers,
I had kind of the benefit of, I had a nonprofit career, economic development, social justice, community development before starting this corporate career. I had an MBA, so really kind of leveraging that best of the nonprofit plus the MBA and kind of tracking, data metrics, making the business case. Sometimes it doesn't always have to start with a grand statement, across the executive team. You can start with kind of pilots and build momentum that way. And I think, what we've been able to develop is also that customer demand, right? Our customers go to our brands because they look for the quality, they look for the sustainability. And we're seeing really a sea change in how customers are approaching this. And there's, tons of market research emerging, and just it's top of mind, particularly since the pandemic, since the impact of climate change. Customers want to know how they can participate. So I think your customers can be like huge stakeholder driving force, and that's a way to get it embedded in the business, right? Because it's creating value, it's creating that long-term value. I think also you need that top level support. You can only do grounds up for so long. You need board oversight, you need an engaged CEO and across the C-suite really to understand how each piece of the organization contributes. And then, back to the point around communications, you can't kind of do anything without communications. Like, it's not going to be embedded in business process unless you actually have tools that people can use in their day-to-day. So for example, we've spent a lot of effort building out a resource hub, right? We have a core team, but we need resources for our merchants to understand, what are the certifications that we offer that ladder up to our larger umbrella goals. We've resources for design and product development to know which of our vendors hold those certifications and what's the scope of that certificate. And then we just do a lot of influencing. We issue a quarterly newsletter around our work and what's happening across the company. We hold trainings for our store associates because they're the ones who are conveying this to our customers. So you can't have great programs in isolation without communicating and training, not just externally, but across your organization, so people know what they need to be driving towards and how they fit into this larger structure and strategy. And I love the idea of all this work kind of being more, in a strategic function. I absolutely see that is where it's going. A lot of the work is really long-term. We have a 10-year climate goal, and that's, not even considered long-term, that's considered near-term. So really, what is the strategic imperative of the company and how do you build this in as a layer?
Great, thanks. Ralph, what about ambition? Where does that sort of sit with you?
Yeah, happy to share a few thoughts and experience on that. So it goes without saying that without C-level support, you won't succeed. And also the same accounts for Volkswagen. So Herbert Diess is a clear change agent towards e-mobility, and the mission and the message is quite clear. If you want to decarbonize transport, you have to electrify transport, period. There is no alternative. And also we could talk probably for hours about fuel cells and the likes, but in the end of the day, it will be electrification. And that was a very strong commitment. And I remember having had my first board presentation 4 years ago with a somewhat different managing board constitution than we have now. And it was talking to them about the carbon footprint of our portfolio. And they said, well, if you make the math and sum up all the emissions along the life cycle multiplied by 10 million cars sold per year, it ends up at 1% of global carbon emission. And the initial reaction of some board members was, well, this can't be true. This must not be true. Some people said, if this is true, you should not talk about it. But there were also other people saying, well, I believe it's true, and then we have to act upon it. But that was the situation just 4 years ago. And I would say the mindset of the board of management we were completely changed, and they are all really driving electrification and decarbonization of transport. We meanwhile have science-based target. We have a goal set for carbon neutrality by 2050, the latest, reducing life cycle emissions, so not only operations, by 30% within 10 years from now, or 8 years from now versus 2018. So a lot of things happening. We are investing in our own batteries, factories, and so forth. So significant amount of things changed. And apart from the CEO commitment, where Herbert Diess is a key driver, in the case of Volkswagen, I think there are a couple of other drivers behind it. And one is quite obvious. It was also the diesel scandal back in 2015. It's a very, very expensive learning experience, I have to say. It cost the company so far roughly 30 billion euros, so $35 billion or something like that. But this was a call for action because it was quite clear the company could not continue as it had done in the past. And this, very expensive learning journey, I think meanwhile gave us a competitive advantage because we have understood earlier than others, apart from Tesla, that e-mobility will the way forward for decarbonizing transport and to offer good solutions for transport. I would not directly say, a bit different to Jennifer, that there was a customer demand, the key driving force initially for e-mobility, because customers have to convince and people who buy a car, many of them are somewhat resistant or love what they know from the past. Once you have brought a customer into an e-car, it completely changes, but you have to bring them into the new system, so to say, because there's range anxiety, there's charging anxiety, and all these things. So from that point of view, CEO commitment plus the scandal.
Yeah.
The third driver, obviously, in our industry is also legislation, because regulators, they set strong limits in terms of carbon emissions per kilometers or on the use of the miles per gallon. And so this is also driving force for innovations, because at some point in time, you only can achieve those limits with significant technology changes. So that's another key driver in our industry.
Yeah, interesting. Some fascinating similarities, and then big departures and differences there. On Heather, and also Ralph was answering my next question, so I'm going to roll it to you with a sort of, Heather, with a sort of question 1 and 2, was just where the ambition comes from as you see it in NY, and what were some of those key places, and then also, was there a difficulty like Ralph described on the kind of the emission scandal, like was there a difficulty, a hump that you guys had to go for? Like I'm thinking of sort of the pressure on fossil fuel investments on investors, for instance, being an obvious one, but there might be something else.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a wide range of stakeholders. You know, I'm surprised that you guys didn't say shareholders first, because that's sort of where your point, that some of the largest pressure in terms of proxy votes and lots of things were happening. We don't have shareholders. We have our we're mutual, so our policyholders are actually our owners. So we sort of share 2 stakeholder groups in one there. But for us, I would say regulatory is huge. So to Ralph's point, and it's really interesting. We're a U.S.-based company. We do have asset management firms around the world, but primarily in the U.S. And there are a few drivers for us. As an insurance company, we're actually primarily regulated on the state level. So federal regulation affects us to a certain extent, but we are domiciled in New York State, and so the New York State Department of Financial Services is our primary regulator. They issued a circular last year around enhanced climate related disclosures. And so, there's increased pressure, especially on private companies. Public companies have had to do a lot of this because of the SEC, but also I think because of investor pressure. So if you want to make, the sustainability indices, et cetera, there are certain thresholds you have to meet. There are ESG raters and rankers like MSCI and Sustainalytics that a lot of investors are looking at to, help them gauge where they can be invested in. And I think especially on the European and to a certain degree Asian front, this is front and center. You had some European investors who just won't invest in companies that have low ratings or aren't don't have any public plans or commitments. So I think that's a huge driver. In the U.S. also on the state basis, what we're actually seeing is sort of some contrarian legislation, right? So, it seems like the world is moving on this path of decarbonization and making these 2050, commitments to be net zero, et cetera. But then we have the state of Texas passing legislation that says the state of Texas won't do business with any company that boycotts or discriminates against energy companies. And so everyone's left to sort of define what that means. For example, Texas won't do business with Unilever. So Unilever cannot provide products or services to any government entity in Texas because they are considered, to be on this list. And so we're starting to see more and more states in the United States passing this legislation, or at least looking at it, Missouri, West Virginia, Louisiana. So you're going to see this sort of tale of 2 states, right, in the U.S. causing a lot of confusion for huge companies, especially financial services firms that have made some pretty major commitments. And then on the other hand, you have the SEC now saying, okay, Texas, well, let's look at what these statements are. And are they truly statements? Because how can you make a statement like this, but then also say, certify in Texas that you can do business there? So there's now all this, sort of infighting or regulatory pressure to figure out, what that means. I'd say for us, we also, see it from employees, prospective employees. Certainly younger generations are asking a lot more questions about, a whole range of ESG commitments, climate being one of them, but again, diversity and equity inclusion being another one. And again, I think, these issues and these kinds of stakeholders are similar for a lot of nonprofits. Even for smaller nonprofits, diversity, equity, inclusion for me is probably the biggest thing that nonprofits are having to grapple with, how they set equity goals, the kinds of statements, the kinds of trainings they're providing to their staff, how they're looking to diversify their boards and their leadership, because a lot of funders are now saying, we're not going to give to, or we're going to, look to only give to organizations that have a clear plan and path there. Similarly, I think on the data privacy, that's a huge issue for every company, right? If you're interacting, if you're collecting information online, you have to make sure that you have clear protocols. For a lot of nonprofits that especially are dealing with children, collecting information about children, that is a heightened issue. And also I'd say, on climate, there are a number of large nonprofits like hospitals and other, entities, certainly anybody that owns property that also has to start thinking about their own emissions profile and how they're going to communicate that and how they're going to deal with not just, funder questions, but New York City, for example, has legislation that says you're going to have to lower your emissions if you own a building here. So, I think these issues really now are spanning across both for-profit and nonprofit sectors.
Wow, yeah.
I'd like to.
Yeah, go for it, Ralph.
Peter, I like to add a few thoughts on Heather's question. Why not investors? And it's a great question. And one answer for the case of Volkswagen is, I mean, yes, we are obviously a stock listed company, but majority of voting shares is basically owned by the Porsche and Kirch family and state of Lower Saxony, some anchor investors. So we're somewhat a listed family business in certain regards. So that's one aspect. The other one is, I would say, it was not the initial driver, the capital market or the shareholders. And to a certain extent, in Europe, I would say many other factors were earlier than the capital market as a key driver on ESG. Meanwhile, in the last 2 years, it changed, since we're seeing such a big movement on the investment side, while ESG-linked loans, the green bonds which we issued, so there's advantages on the cost of capital side. And then there's expectations from investors, the funds, and you mentioned, I think, Jennifer, MSCI and Sustainalytics, and the likes, ISS, ESG ratings. While they pose their questions, they drive demand on the investor side. So it was not that much visible until, I would say, 3 years ago, but since 2 years, it clearly accelerates.
Yeah, I'd also add in like traditional rating agencies. All the traditional rating agencies here in the U.S. have purchased ESG firms. They're starting to issue now sector guidelines and to some extent, individual company reports. It's a little bit different, so it's not really looking at your progress on ESG issues, but it's how ESG relates to your credit, worthiness, and so that's going to become obviously a very important driver and a new sort of.
It's definitely an evolution in that space, and I mean the ESG or SRI investment. It was until a couple of years ago. It was a very tiny little niche of those core SRI investors, and meanwhile, while Moody's purchased some rating agencies and S&P took over the previous Dow Jones Sustainability, Robeco Sam folks. So there's, from my perspective, a consolidation on the one hand side and also an integration on the classical rating agencies.
Yeah, I'll add to that kind of on the practitioner side. We've been embedding these programs in our supply chain for 2 decades, but it was only a couple of years ago that I really took on this new area of our ESG strategy and saying, okay, how do we marry up the disclosures around what we've been doing internally for decades to kind of what's relevant and material to our industry and have that reflect in our ratings. And so it's been really interesting to see that dialogue. And then the investor community and shareholders are incredibly important to my work, as a sustainability and social impact practitioner, because, it elevates the conversation. BlackRock is one of our largest institutional investors. I able to join our CFO and outreach, annually, and just that Larry Fink letter and kind of having that conversation across the C-suite is tremendous in being able to drive our progress. And we're always looking, for wins on the sustainability side, but continue to develop the momentum to propel our programs forward, and certainly being able to deliver that across the finance org into the investment community and working with investor relations is a huge piece of the overall strategy.
Great. And this last few minutes of conversation is also sort of linking to a couple of audience questions we've got here, which I'm going to attempt to combine, which is the sort of where you've seen the data and metrics evolve. Has there been a correlation, for instance, and a plug-in to UN SDGs, not just carbon targets? And also a nod to sort of the audience in terms of nonprofits and philanthropy out there. Is like, what metrics are you looking for from nonprofit partners that best reflect the impact and value you want to see from them? So who wants to take this sort of data metrics evolution just a little bit further there?
I might kick this off.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, Heather, ladies first.
There you go. Heather off, Jen. There we go.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to sort of the impact question around what the foundation, for example, is looking from our nonprofit funders. I think, the good news, I think, for nonprofits is the trend is really less restrictive reporting. I mean, I think we came out of an era of data, and sort of every large foundation had its own very prescriptive, progress report and looking for very specific data around the specific project they are funding. I think there's a nice trend where there's more general operating support available, which means that the core mission of what you're doing, where you already have goals set, where you're already collecting data, that data can span the horizon if everybody is including general operating support in their funding. But I think more specifically, the impacts really need to be discussed, I think, at the time of the grant conversation, because I think the nonprofits, to a certain extent, need to speak up a bit more about how feasible and easy it is to provide some of the data that companies or foundations are looking for, and be honest about, the cost of that. So, for example, if I want a third-party evaluation to tell me, how something has progressed, I'm going to need to give money to that nonprofit to do that, because those things are very expensive. And so I think it really starts with an honest conversation, but I do think that the trend is in less prescriptive numbers and data, and more listening to nonprofits about how are you measuring the work that you think needs to be done. And then if you're doing, for example, one report on a certain, program that you have, that should be sufficient for us to look at to see what progress has been made.
Great, thank you. Ralph.
Yeah, let me first start with the SDG question.
Yeah.
And we obviously we mapped or matched SDGs to our core activities in the field of sustainability, and quite obvious. It's 4 to 5. It's climate action as a biggest one. It's sustainable cities and communities. It's responsible consumption and production, and then we're talking about probably quality education, good health and well-being, and these ones in a second row. So it's roughly a handful of SDGs plus partnerships for the goals, which we are contributing towards directly or indirectly. However, we did not put the SDGs at the forefront of our sustainability or ESG strategy. We narrowed it a bit down to what really matters in terms of, CO2 impact. Behind you have climate action, or if you talk about sustainable supply chains, I mean, these contribute to probably no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, and so many. So our aim is rather to specify the activities on the ground and set goals and KPIs to measure things. Sometimes, I love the SDGs because it's kind of common understanding and they're colorful and so forth. But sometimes they're also a bit difficult because certain aspects are somewhat vague, or the activities you pursue contribute to a number of SDGs. And a few words on impact measurement for new non-profits. I have to say that probably Volkswagen still is also in a learning curve on what to expect and what to ask for in terms of impact measurement. So our CSR strategy for donations and sponsoring in the past, I would say, was often driven by, this is a great activity, let's spend some money on it, and not really measuring impact. So we are still in this evolution from counting input in terms of millions of euros donated towards, what did really change and what is the impact of that respective NGO activity, not-for-profit activity, be it number of children educated and passed their exams with an investment of XYZ, or we're right now talking to an NGO who's doing farmer-managed natural regeneration in Africa, and then you have environmental impacts in terms of hectares, afforestation, but you also have social impacts on increasing wealth and well-being of the farmers there, and how many women are educated in terms of good farming practice and so forth. So I find it impressive if you ask what not-for-profits are often already to deliver. The challenge is if you have different nonprofits you're working with, there's no common denominator or not the one indicator we say, okay, all impacts I count into that one. So you have to differentiate.
Yeah, and interesting the Heather that movement, which sounds like that becoming less prescriptive and learning from the nonprofit. Jennifer, how would you sort of respond to that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I think we have so many different nonprofit partnerships. In some ways, the nonprofits can help set those standards, right? They're sort of like this impartial, they can cross many different kinds of corporations. So if they help set those standards for how you're tracking certain information. So for example, we're part of membership organizations like the Sustainable Apparel Coalition. We're one of the exclusive home furnishings, really bringing that home furnishings conversation forward. Textile exchange, but we need shared, data and information on life cycle assessment and, impact metrics for materials, right? And so that's something that needs to be shared across companies so that we get to some standardization. Other nonprofits we work with, like we've done vision screenings in factories. It's one of the programs I'm proudest of. And we've used kind of data and data capture to also make the case for scaling and bringing other brands along. So I think it can be really, effective on basic metrics. So we partnered with nonprofit Vision Spring. We kind of wanted to do a pilot. We chose 3 factories, 600 workers, said, we know that vision is probably a really unmet need. And now this is, also tying back to some of the UN SDGs because of their work. We screened factories, 56% of the workers needed some kind of corrective vision. And, that has borne out across. So after screening 600 people, a really kind of small pilot, we were able to make the case to screen across our supply chain. Multiple countries have screened over 30,000 workers in our supply chain and got a host of other brands signed up. So, they're on track to reach almost 500,000 workers across global supply chains. And we're working with them to say, then what does it do to earning potential? What does it do to quality of life? And I think it's a great point to Heather that, these kind of assessments aren't free. So you need, multi-stakeholder and partnership to really do something to come up with some valid metrics that you can base a strategy off of. And that helps you get momentum. I mean, metrics work well in the business world, right? It, can be one indicator of like a larger story, but it's kind of that foot in the door that you can say, here's the stats of why this matters and the impact it has. And then, make it part of your broader storytelling that gets the stakeholder engagement, the influence to drive programs at scale.
Thanks, and this links so nicely for those that are in the audience. And I just got the keynote last night from Cherise West about sort of the way that we've been thinking traditionally about charity is wrong, or dead wrong. I think she said that they're going towards impact and what they can produce rather than how low a cost they can do their activities, and as Ralph said, like dollars out to them, but like what can be done. I did have a quick fire round, but you guys, I said to everybody I have 3 hours worth of questions and 3 hours worth of insights from you guys. Instead, we've got just a minute each to so I just wanted to prime you on advice to those in the audience, especially on their sort of non-linear careers that are no doubt ahead of them if they want to go into sustainability like you guys. So, things like straight out of Yale to what, big company or small? Why the big company, like, and what's your journey? And most importantly, sort of advice to those in the room as they embark on their career. So let's see if you could do a minute or less each on that sort of nuggets of insights and advice from where you sit. Let's go, Heather first. Go for it. Close this out.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think frankly, the advice I give probably transcends whatever job you're looking for. It's, find a company or a place where you will feel good about telling people you work there, right? So, in my experience, it's much easier to work for a company where not only you're excited about your particular role, but you truly believe in the mission of that organization. You're proud to be there, and you're not a little bit ashamed to say, what that organization does at the end of the day. And especially, I think, for a CSR or a sustainability role, that's probably doubly important, because in your role, you will at some point be a representative of that company. You will be, talking about the good works of that company. And if the holistic role of that company is not something you can get behind, you're probably not going to have a lasting career there. The other thing I would stress, I mean, I'm sure this is pretty typical, is just, especially as you're starting out in career, like, take some risks, do some things maybe that you're not comfortable with. It's really helpful, I think, to gain as many disparate and differing skill sets as you can at the beginning of your career before you actually funnel into what it is you're going to want to focus on. I'm sure, like many folks, my first job, I worked at Fannie Mae, which I loved, and I was in housing community development, but it's not where ultimately I ended up. But the different roles I had there in technology, in structured finance, they've all been really helpful in understanding, the role I have today. And then the last thing I would say is just to always be curious, like always be reading. I mean, I spend a good portion of my day every day reading newsletters and reading different articles, not just about my job or about my sector or my company, but about a broad range of things, because you just never know when you're going to see a great idea or hear about something that you can bring back to your business. And I think for all of us, we obviously have a role to play at our company. There are things that we have direct responsibility for, but to become a leader in an organization, you have to be thinking beyond your own role. And so there's lots of ways to bring good ideas to the company. And I just think remaining curious and reading and paying attention to things is important.
Thanks so much. And I've been a bad timekeeper in this hour. So Jen and Ralph, if you could give me a few seconds each, just some nuggets. And then for everybody, there's an informal hangout for afterwards. So hopefully some of us can stay around for that. Jen, then Ralph, go for it. A few seconds.
Great. I'd say be specific. So target a sector, target a type of role, because that'll help you kind of go deep and find all the different kinds of companies. Size of company over corporate form. A large nonprofit and a large corporation probably have more in common than a small nimble nonprofit and a small startup, right? So think, do you want to kind of go deep and narrow, or do you want to be broad? And then, just seize and make your own opportunity. My job didn't exist. I wrote it. I rewrote it. I keep on rewriting it. So this is an industry with tons of change and opportunity. So, be a visionary, put something out there, ask for what you want and build your role to match.
Great stuff. Thanks so much, Ralph.
Well, follow your heart. First advice. And then second, I would say clearly have a look what your personal values are and how do they match with your potential employer's values. Because this is, especially in this role, it's absolutely essential that you can convey the story within the organization, but also being an ambassador towards the outside world. And if the values don't match, you won't succeed. And I think also be mindful over time if the values of the company change or your values change, and if there's still an overlap after a couple of years. Otherwise, you will also lose out. And be curious is a good one. My pitch, or my personal pitch, was basically really changing mainstream industry. So I was not opting for a small, super conscious, super environmental or sustainable niche. My ambition is to really change the mainstream, because I believe I can have the biggest impact there. But that's another very personal decision. That's
great. Thank you so much. And for three of you, they also sound like you are actually living into your own advice as well. It's been an absolute pleasure having you for the last hour.